Back when Breaking Bad was approaching its finale, I assumed we were rapidly approaching the last we'd ever see of the world Vince Gilligan created. Sure, we knew a spin-off was possible, and we knew that AMC would love to greenlight one, considering the guaranteed moneymaker it would be, but Breaking Bad never felt like the kind of show you would spin off from. It wasn't a sitcom or some network series where, as long as the money is coming in, they'll keep cranking them out. This was Breaking Bad. This was a creative endeavor from writers with a unique vision. It was a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It was a work of art. Getting a spin-off to Breaking Bad would be like getting a spin-off to The Godfather. So when Vince Gilligan began discussing the idea of a spin-off openly, I was still skeptical. When the Saul Goodman spin-off finally became official, I remember at the time being so curious what that would look like. Would it be a 30-minute comedic sitcom? Which is apparently an idea they actually considered. But now looking back, the answer seems obvious. The show feels a lot like Breaking Bad, with the caveat that it's focused on the early days of Saul Goodman before he embraced a life of crime. So naturally, where Breaking Bad was drama, suspense, and a touch of comedy, Better Call Saul is drama, comedy, and a touch of suspense. Though, even if the show started with less suspense than Breaking Bad, it more than made up for it by weaving tension into its character drama. Think of any scene between Jimmy and Chuck in the first couple of seasons. The tension of Jimmy desperately seeking his brother's love and respect, but only ever receiving judgment. It keeps you on the edge of your seat in a different way from the suspense of Walt in the early days of Breaking Bad. Weighing the pros and cons of killing Crazy 8, for example, also known as Ocho Loco. With the fate of at least some of its main characters largely known, Better Call Saul is forced to depend on these character dynamics more than life and death stakes. Where we wondered if Walt's family or Jesse would live from one episode to the next in Breaking Bad, in Better Call Saul, we wonder how Kim will react to Jimmy's latest scheme and what it will do to their relationship. We wonder about the fate of Kim and Jimmy's souls as they delve deeper into moral gray areas. Now, I don't want to diminish Breaking Bad at all, because that show obviously dealt with a lot of similar themes, and it's not like it threatened the lives of main characters every episode. But there's no denying that as a prequel, Better Call Saul had a tougher road toward building suspense and drama. And I think that's why many fans of Better Call Saul have come around to saying that it may be better than Breaking Bad. In some ways, that's not surprising. Many of the same writers and directors worked on both shows, so there's no reason we shouldn't expect their craft to improve over the years. But I think the tougher road this show has as a prequel is also part of the reason people are so impressed by it. It's impressive that it's gotten us so invested in seeing how a character ends up in a place we already met him, how Jimmy McGill became Saul Goodman, and how Mike Ehrmantraut, parking attendant, became Mike Ehrmantraut, lethal enforcer for Gus Fring. Though it's also interesting to note, comparing the two shows, that as the seasons have gone by, Better Call Saul has definitely gotten closer in tone to Breaking Bad. Just look at the scene of Lalo entering Jimmy and Kim's home, or Nacho letting in Gus's assassins to annihilate Lalo's people. Now we're getting those life and death stakes. Now we're getting that Breaking Bad flavor of action. But we're getting it after 5 seasons of masterful character development. So now we are hitting unprecedented levels of heart-racing suspense because the characters in the crosshairs are meticulously developed characters we care deeply about. You can see Peter Gould in this interview actually comment on how the shows have become more and more similar over time.
So we wanted to mostly work in is how is this different from Breaking Bad? That was probably the biggest thing. And of course, I think as the show has gone on, it's gotten more similar, to be honest with you, in some ways. I still think it's completely different, but
I don't know about you, but I detect a hint of bashfulness or self-consciousness about that fact. Like there's something wrong with repeating some of the same themes or going back over well-trodden ground. But I think that was sort of inevitable. Both shows are about characters getting tempted further and further down a dark path. For me, the difference is less about where the characters end up and more about how they got there. At the end of Breaking Bad, Saul and Walt both end up in that disappearer's cellar, but they both got there following very different journeys. Specifically, they were following very different impulses and motivations. Walt was seeking a feeling of fulfillment that he never got in civilian life. His previous life led to low self-esteem and a bruised ego. Suddenly, he found this world that made him feel alive, and he got a taste of power, and I think he chased that down the dark road. Or as I like to call it, ever since Jimmy coined the phrase in season 5, bad choice road.
This is a bad choice road.
Jimmy's journey is similar, but also pretty different. In Walt's case, everyone saw him as an upstanding member of society, and at worst, maybe a little meek. But no one expected him to go the way he did. Jimmy, on the other hand, was Slippin' Jimmy, the most important people in his life, or maybe the most important person in his life, Chuck, always saw him as Slippin' Jimmy. From the beginning, Jimmy was expected to go down bad choice road. Where anyone would have been shocked to find out Walt became Heisenberg, Chuck would have only said, "I told you so," if he knew Jimmy was going to become Saul Goodman. Both shows did such a good job crafting complex characters, so you'll never be able to point to the one flaw or the one moment that turned them into who they become. But in Jimmy's case, I do think the weight of expectation, specifically the expectation of failure or corruption, played a large role in pushing him down a bad path. And I use that word push very specifically. I wouldn't use that word with Walt. His choices all felt motivated from within, whereas Jimmy feels like he got a push from Chuck. That's why he's always felt like a more tragic figure to me. I think Walt was happy as Heisenberg. He loved that power. But Jimmy, I think some of his soul is still in there. And if you were to just barely scratch the surface of Saul Goodman, you'd find a very sad man. At the same time, the opening scene of the show is Gene Takovic pining for the good times. He watches the tapes of Saul Goodman, and that's literally the only glimpse of color in his life. You see the glint of color on his black and white glasses. So maybe he was happy as Saul Goodman, or maybe he's looking at those times through rose-colored glasses. I have to say, they've set up such an interesting set of questions here going into the final season. On one hand, I'm really curious what state of mind Jimmy McGill is in when he becomes the Saul Goodman we see in Breaking Bad. Is he happy? Is Kim around? How much of his scumbag nature is an act? Or how much has he really become hardened by the criminal acts we've already witnessed and everything yet to come in Season 6? That's one set of questions. At the same time, I have similar questions about Gene Takovic. Does he regret his actions? Does he understand where he went wrong? Or does he just pine for the days of Saul Goodman? For a prequel, it's really impressive how much they've been able to turn the future into a giant question mark. One of the biggest risks this show had was feeling inessential, in the sense that Breaking Bad already told an amazing story of moral decay and transformation. Do we need to see all that play out again? But this time, instead of chemistry teacher to drug kingpin, it's public defender to scumbag lawyer for the cartel. Thankfully, Better Call Saul has shown us that the answer to this question is yes. Peter Gould, Vince Gilligan, plus the rest of the writers and directors, know how to tell a great story, and they know how to conduct a fascinating character study. So on the surface, revisiting the same world from different perspectives has unsurprisingly resulted in a great story. But importantly, it also works on a deeper thematic level, because although Better Call Saul spotlights similar themes as Breaking Bad, it doesn't just repeat them, it expands on them. Breaking Bad showed us some answers to the questions of what drives us to violence, what drives us to moral decay, and how do we hurt everyone around us when we give in to these things. Better Call Saul makes these themes more universal by showing us more answers to these questions. It turns out that pride and ego aren't the only things we need to be cautious of. And of course, it explores some of its own themes too. Through Kim, we explore the conflict of profession versus moral fulfillment. Through Jimmy and Chuck especially, we explore the mutual destruction of a broken relationship filled with unspoken resentments. So we can have fun debating which show is better if we want, but ultimately, they complement each other. They are two unique journeys into a world where actions have very visible karmic consequences. Taken together, they represent a series of fascinating character studies and an epic morality tale full of cautionary lessons. And on top of all that, Better Call Saul surprised us with the addition of a few new characters that we've gotten really invested in. I say surprised because even by the time Better Call Saul actually began to air, it was not clear that there were going to be protagonists other than Jimmy. You can of course point to Kim and Nacho, but in the first season, they really felt like they were in supporting roles. Mainly there as a way to provoke and illuminate the protagonists, Jimmy and Mike. Even Mike was a surprise. He really didn't play a huge role in the first couple of episodes. At that point, he might have just been a fun, recurring cameo from Breaking Bad. But of course, 5-0 changed all that when we learned his tragic backstory. And seeing his reluctance to kill, we learned how far he still had to fall to become Gus Fring's ruthless killer. Like Walt, like Jimmy, and like Kim, Mike also went down a dark path. But he too got there in a very different way from Walt, following different motivations. But that's a story for another day. Specifically, a day that will come later this week. So make sure you're subscribed to keep up with One Take's Week of Saul, where we're celebrating the final season with a new video about Better Call Saul every day this week. With that, thank you for watching and see you on the next One Take.